Hey, what's up? Thanks for stopping by. I've decided I'm gonna start making more videos on my second channel. I think I'm gonna try to put out like one video every week. I think I can get like stuck in this headspace where I'm obsessing over wanting to make sure every little detail of my videos are perfect, and then I've like chosen the perfect topic to talk about, and then that sometimes makes it so that I'm only releasing like one video every 2 months or so, and I'm just not happy with that. I'd like to be uploading on a more like consistent schedule, and I would like to be doing these videos where I can kind of like talk on a more casual basis, more like off the cuff and less like scripted, I guess. So that's what this channel's going to be for. These videos are going to be a lot less formal, a lot less scripted, and hopefully they'll come out a lot more often. So I appreciate you being here. Today we're going to talk about a little drama that I think a lot of people on the internet have heard about. A lot of people are talking about it right now. And this is the drama surrounding the Idubbbz apology video that he put out recently. There are kind of like 4 different responses that I've seen from people online about this apology. There are people who really don't like Idubbbz and they don't forgive him for the apology because they think that his content in the past was like so harmful that he doesn't deserve an apology. There are the people who felt like it was a good apology and they're happy with it. There are the people who absolutely hated the apology because they're mad that he's turned his back on his past content, and these are the people who like the fact that his content used to be like super edgy and that he would say slurs and all that. But then there's like a 4th group that's taking more of a centrist position where they're like okay that he apologized but think that the apology wasn't really that necessary, and this is the position that the big YouTuber MoistCr1tikal's has taken. Now, I would consider myself a fan of MoistCr1tikal's. I watch him on like almost a daily basis, and I agree with like 90% of the things he says, I would say. So this isn't me like trying to start beef with Charlie or any dumb shit like that, but I do think his take on the Idubbbz apology was a bit narrow-sighted, and I hope to give context for why I feel that way. I would say I fall into the camp of people who was really happy with Idubbbz apology video. I did kind of disagree with a few of the things he said, or I don't know if I like fully disagree, but I feel like I want to add a bit more nuance to his takes. Just to give some context, I was definitely a big fan of Idubbbz when I was back in high school. I would say like the edgy style of humor was my favorite style of humor. I definitely never like fell down the alt-right pipeline or anything like that because at the time I felt like the edgy humor wasn't supposed to be taken seriously. But I definitely see how this type of content did cause some boys to fall down the alt-right pipeline, because you watch content like Idubbbz content where he's saying a bunch of slurs, and then you start thinking slurs are funny, so you go search out other content where people are saying slurs, and then the other content where people are saying slurs has a little bit of a right-wing lean to it, and then before you know it, you're watching more and more and more right-wing content, and then you've eventually ended up on the alt-right side of YouTube. My favorite shows at the time were shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and South Park, and the reason I really liked those shows is because they took a satirical angle, and while the characters on screen were saying awful things, it always felt like they were criticizing the fact that these were bad people. But as I've gotten older and I've matured, I've kind of realized that just like throwing the label of satire on something doesn't always make it totally justified. Like, for example, South Park definitely did make fun of a lot of bad people with their content, but then they also had things like stereotypically racist depictions of Asian people.
Alright, welcome to Shitty Walk. Take an order, please.
And I don't think that these like stereotypical depictions were like satirizing how it's bad to make fun of Asians. Like, they kind of just were making fun of Asians, if you get what I'm saying. And I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of just like slapping the satire label on something and then not doing any more critical thinking about how that content actually could still be harmful. Because while a lot of Idubbbz content was satirical and he was criticizing bad people, he also was doing things like making legitimate arguments about why it should be okay for white people to say slurs.
It's either all okay or none of it's okay. It's important to remember if you ever mistakenly identify a word as off limits, No words are off limits.
And when he made these arguments about why it's okay to say slurs, these were not satirical arguments. He wasn't making fun of people making the argument that it's okay to say slurs. He was genuinely saying that it's okay to say slurs. I think the apology was kind of centered around two core ideas. One idea is that his content in the past harmed people, especially black people who had to deal with the edgy teenagers who started calling them the N-word because of Idubbbz video. And I think it's really good that he's apologizing for this because I do think this content helped influence people to treat minorities in a really shitty way at the time, and that's definitely something that's worth apologizing for. But the second idea is that he's apologizing because he thinks his content cop videos were too cruel and that no one deserves the amount of hate that came from his content cop videos.
I have made some cruel, hurtful content. I don't think anyone deserves that level of cruelty or hate.
And I think this is a bit more nuanced because some of the people that he criticized in his content cop videos were terrible people, like Keemstar and Leafy. And the question of, is it bad to be cruel to someone who has made an entire career off of being cruel to other people is more of a nuanced question. But I'll get more into my thoughts on that later. For now, let's watch a few of the clips of MoistCr1tikal's responding to Idubbbz's apology.
For a while, I felt like if I changed my content over time, that people would see that as a reflection of who I am and what I value. But I'm starting to realize that that is a very weak and passive way to, run my channel and live my life.
I'm sorry to immediately come in here with the Phoenix Wright objection, but I completely disagree with the sentiment that it's weak or passive to change your content and expect people to see that as a reflection of yourself. That's pretty much the optimal way of handling any kind of situation in which you're not comfortable with either your audience or the content you've been making. By changing the content over time, you're changing the audience over time as well, obviously, right? The people that subscribed for your previous catalog of content might not stick around for the stuff you start creating when it goes in a different direction, and that's a totally fine thing. I don't think there's anything weak about just making different content and growing individually without having to come forward and share that growth with your audience. At the end of the day, your subscribers aren't your friends. You don't know them and they don't know you. That's the brass tacks of it. Sorry to blast the cold water in your face first thing in the morning. You don't owe them an explanation for why you're changing your content. You're welcome to tell them. I think that's totally within your right to do. But I really disagree that it's weak if you don't explain why you're changing your content. You can just make different stuff and go in that direction where you're happier without ever really needing to come forward and really lecture on why.
So Charlie thinks that the best thing to do when you switch to making new content is to just move on and make new content, and that there's not really a reason to distance yourself from the previous content. I think this can sometimes be true, like if you're just switching the type of content you make from commentary videos to vlogs or something. In that case, you obviously wouldn't need to distance yourself from your old content and be like, I can't believe I made commentary videos in the past. Vlogs are so much better. That would obviously be pointless. But the reason Idubbbz specifically feels like he needs to distance himself from his previous content is because in that content, he made arguments that led to people being harmed. If in the past you made arguments that influenced people in a negative direction, it would make sense that you want to go back and now make the opposite argument to try to influence people in a positive direction. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of like when an influencer does a brand deal and promotes a really bad product to their audience, but then later realizes that the product that they promoted was bad. I think most people would agree that that YouTuber has a responsibility to go back and correct the record and tell their audience hey, I promoted a really bad product here. If the YouTuber was like, oh, well, I promoted a scam to my audience, but, I'm just going to move on and just forget about it and leave it in the past, I think most people would agree that that's not the right response. And I think it's the same way with arguments. If you convince a lot of people that it's okay to say slurs, then down the line you change your mind and you think it's not okay to say slurs, then I do think you have some responsibility to go back and now try to influence those people that it's not okay to say slurs. Now, this of course only applies with like harmful opinions. Like if in the past you tried to convince people that like The Dark Knight was the greatest movie of all time, but now you've changed your mind about your favorite movie, like obviously there's no responsibility to go back and try to influence your audience that like The Dark Knight actually isn't the best movie of all time. But I think when it comes to things like promoting scams or promoting really harmful ideas that have a negative impact on people, I do think you have some sort of responsibility.
I think I should have the balls to make an apology video and take accountability for the mistakes I've made. So that's what this video is. I am responsible for creating a lot of hurtful and damaging content on this channel. And I've also created a culture of apathy and, I don't know, a lot of like cruelty as well.
He wasn't happy with the content he made or the person he was, and now he's trying to apologize for the videos he made. And I, once again, have to completely disagree with the way he looks at it. I feel like his perspective on it is very warped by the way the internet has evolved over the years. The way he talks about this content makes it sound like he used to fucking murder puppies for these videos, which it was never that extreme. I very much would consider it edgy. It was 2016 edginess in all of its glory. That was entirely the brand. Now, obviously, times have changed, then he has changed. He's gotten older. He's in his 30s now. In your 30s, it's not exactly entertaining to just be spamming slurs for shock humor. I don't find that entertaining, and he doesn't either. So it's totally fine to want to distance yourself from making content like that. But I don't think it was a mistake that he made those videos. Like, they're not hurtful, nor do I really think they're damaging.
So this is where I think Charlie's being pretty narrow-sighted, because it's really easy for us as white guys to sit here and be like, no, those videos weren't hurtful. He was just making jokes. Like, my life was never hurt because of Idubbbz telling people it's okay to say slurs. But I have seen multiple black people online talking about stories where when they were in high school, they had some edgy white guy come up and call them the N-word and then justify it by citing Idubbbz video. So while the video might not be hurtful or harmful to you or me, Charlie, we never had to be the ones who had to sit there and endure being called slurs. And you might think like, oh, these were just random edgy YouTube videos. Did they really have like that much of an impact on people? But like, there's a reason why influencers are called influencers. It's because we do have influence over people. I will agree that it's like weird to wrap your head around the concept that you can have that much of an influence over people. Like, to me, I'm just some random dude talking to a camera right now. But these videos going out to thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people means that it really does have an influence over people. And then I've seen some people on Twitter making the disingenuous argument where they're like, oh, so now it's Idubbbz's fault when people say slurs? I thought people had control over their own actions. And yes, people do have control over their own actions. If you're running around saying slurs and someone calls you out on it, you can't just be like, oh, it's not my fault, Idubbbz told me to. But that also does not mean that Idubbbz is off the hook for influencing people. Like, if I influence my buddy Jim to go murder someone, yes, Jim is the one who's responsible for committing murder, but I am also partially responsible for influencing him to do it. You don't get to be let off the hook for your own personal choices because of the things that influence you. But the people influencing also don't get to be let off the hook for influencing people to do bad things just because people have individual choice. But yeah, with Charlie, in the future, before you give such a firm take on whether like someone using slurs was harmful, try to listen to the experiences of some of the black people who actually had to live through being called slurs at the time. Because if you take the time to try to really empathize with other people's experiences, it'll help keep you from making narrow-sighted takes that only really take into account your own experiences.
But at the end of the day, I don't think the goal of his content was ever to be hurtful or damaging. He was just trying to entertain and using edginess as shock humor, which for its time was acceptable online.
Now, I agree that Idubbbz probably wasn't trying to harm people, but sometimes you have to analyze the impact of your actions, not just your intentions. For example, I was raised in a household where I was taught that it's sinful to be gay. So I thought that it was actually loving to tell gay people that they were sinning because I was showing them the truth of God's word. But now I realize that telling gay people that they're sinful is actually not loving. It's actually harmful. So while my intentions might have been pure and I thought I was spreading the love of God, I was actually being harmful. And at the time, I think Idubbbz was trying to make an argument that he thought was good, like the idea that the more you say the N-word, the less power it has. But this is actually not how slurs work. Like, a bunch of white people saying the N-word doesn't somehow make the N-word less hurtful. That just doesn't logically make sense. And now Idubbbz realizes this. So while at the time he may have thought that he wasn't making a harmful argument, now he realizes that the argument actually was harmful, which is why he feels like he has to apologize.
I have made some cruel, hurtful content, and I need to acknowledge that, and I'm really sorry that it's taken me this long to acknowledge it. The content I'm talking about specifically are content cop videos and videos where I was just generally criticizing people for very lackluster reasons and, obviously didn't have any accountability online whatsoever on my end.
You shouldn't have to apologize for criticizing someone or something. Voicing your opinion on a subject is a totally natural thing to do. I get criticized, I criticize others, people criticize movies, games, music, all of that. And to try and vilify the idea of criticism being evil, I think is a little dangerous because you just create these echo chambers and no one ever really grows from that.
Now, this is where the conversation becomes a bit more nuanced because I think Idubbbz is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit with the apology. I think Idubbbz feels really ashamed of his old videos, specifically the content cop videos, so he's kind of viewing them completely negatively, even though I think there were some good aspects to those videos. Like, I think there's good reason to criticize people like Leafy and Keemstar because these are terrible people who deserve to be humbled. And also, he apologized to everyone who he made content cops on and said that they didn't deserve that amount of hate.
I'm sorry to everyone that I made content cop videos on. I still don't like the majority of you, and that's fine, but I can recognize that you did not deserve the hate and harassment that I sent your way.
And I guess I don't really see why Idubbbz needs to apologize specifically to people like Leafy or Keemstar. I do think it's good that he's apologizing to Tana Mojo. Like, going up to her after her show and saying the N-word to her is an absolutely crazy thing to do, and he absolutely should be apologizing for that. But I guess I feel a lot more conflicted about apologizing to someone like Keemstar, because it kind of feels like by labeling all of his content cop videos cruel, he's kind of criticizing the commentary genre in general. And maybe I'm just like being defensive because I am a commentary creator, but I feel like there are legitimate reasons to make commentary content, and sometimes there can be reasons to be a bit mean in your commentary videos. Like, the reason to make commentary videos is to hold people accountable for their bad behavior. And I think it's good to have a society where we're critical of other people and don't just allow them to do whatever bad shit they want to do with absolutely no accountability. Like, I can definitely be mean towards some of the people I make videos about, but if I was being nice to these terrible people in the videos, that just wouldn't feel right. Unfortunately, when it comes to bullies, usually responding to them with friendly, calm, well-reasoned arguments doesn't stop them from being a bully. Sometimes if you want to stop bullies, you have to embarrass them, because that's like the only language that they speak. Like, for example, a lot of people, me included, have made fun of Sneeko for being a cuck. And the reason for making fun of Sneeko is to hopefully make him a laughingstock, because when someone's a laughingstock, it's way harder for them to influence people. If everyone was just being friendly to Sneeko while he's being a cruel, terrible person, we probably wouldn't have been able to take away as much of his influence. But the thing is, as we're making fun of Sneeko for being a cuck, For some people, being a cuck is like a legitimate kink that they have. Like, there's nothing morally wrong with wanting to watch your partner fuck another dude. And when we make it this like standard thing to insult men for being cucks, that can actually end up hurting some men who are in more like non-traditional relationships. And like the reason you would call someone a cuck usually is because you're trying to emasculate them. And trying to like emasculate men as an insult is basically saying that like they're feminine. And using being feminine as an insult is kind of like misogynistic, and it's kind of like upholding toxic masculinity. Like, personally, I don't think men should be afraid to experiment with whatever type of relationship they want and be as feminine as they want to be. But like, the reason Idubbbz made fun of Leafy for having a weak chin is because Leafy would constantly bully other people, so Idubbbz was like giving him a taste of his own medicine. And I think there's some validity to giving bad people a taste of their own medicine sometimes, especially if by giving them a taste of their own medicine, you can help influence their audience to see why their shitty behavior is shitty. But also, if I insult Leafy for having a weak chin, he can just insult me for having a double chin, and then like, what have we really accomplished here? Like, there's only so much you can really accomplish by just like throwing playground insults back and forth. And if we like make fun of someone like Andrew Tate for being bald, other bald dudes could see that and kind of make them feel like shit because they're like, oh, is there something wrong with being bald? Like, being bald is totally normal. Like, it's totally fucking fine to be bald. But if we start telling people like, hey, stop making fun of people for being bald, that is absolutely unacceptable, then we've like taken away a tool someone could use to possibly tear down a bit of Andrew Tate's massive ego. So like, in my opinion, the benefit of being cruel to bullies is that it can turn them into a laughingstock and decrease their influence. But the downside of being cruel to bullies is the collateral damage this can do to other people who are similar to the bullies. Like, if you think that a fat person is a bad person, so you insult them for being fat instead of insulting them for their bad ideas, that can definitely have a negative impact on other fat people who see this and are now thinking, oh, I guess it is bad to be fat. I don't know, this is all extremely complicated, and as you can see, I have very mixed feelings on the topic. So I think where I'm at is like, it was okay to be a bit cruel to Leafy and Keemstar, because these were people who deserved to be humbled, and because they were turned into laughingstocks, they then had less influence over people. But I agree with Idubbbz that you have to be careful about where you wield your cruelty, because if you're not careful, you can end up being cruel to someone like Tana who did not deserve it. Because while I do think that Tana obviously isn't a perfect person, and she does have some things that probably deserve criticism, she did not deserve the amount of cruelty that Idubbbz showed to her. So anyway, to wrap up, Idubbbz, I'm proud of you that you made the apology. I think it's really good that you're moving on from those past actions, and I think this is a really good step in a positive direction, but also you don't need to feel like totally 100% ashamed of your old stuff, because you did have a positive impact in a lot of ways. It is good that Leafy and Keemstar have less influence now than they used to, and I think you can feel proud of that, honestly. And to Charlie, MoistCr1tical, I would say, in the future, be more careful to really think through the negative impact that slurs can have on people. Because while to you, it might just feel like jokes, it might just feel like edgy content, it might just feel like internet shit that's like not a big deal and doesn't matter, to those black people who had to endure being called slurs every day, it does matter to them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this more like informal style of video. I should be back next week with another video, so hit that fucking goddamn subscribe button. I want to do like more collab videos and more like finding cringy TikTokers to talk about and more just like sitting down and reacting to crazy stuff that I find. I think this format is going to give me a lot more freedom, and then on the main channel, I'm going to be focusing on doing more like long form, like documentary style videos where I really do like deep dives into people, because I think people respond really well to that. But I think it would be good to kind of like mix up the content between the two channels. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Thanks for being awesome. I will see you then.